I heard my own name spoken in a whisper before I realized the door was open. I was standing in the hallway with a cup of cold tea in my hands, frozen, listening. My children were in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. They always think that now. Old people, in their minds, sleep more than they listen. "She won't understand," one of them said. "She doesn't need to know everything," another replied. That was the moment I understood something important. They were talking about me, but not to me. And that hurt more than any illness ever could. I raised 3 children in this house. I washed their clothes with cracked hands, stayed awake through their fevers, skipped meals so they could eat more. I thought love worked like savings: the more you put in, the more you can rely on later. I was wrong. I quietly stepped back, the floor creaking under my weight. My knees ached, my back burned, but the real pain settled somewhere deeper, in a place no doctor could reach. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I stared at the ceiling and realized how invisible I had become. They passed by my door without stopping. They spoke decisions without my voice. My life, my home, my future. All discussed as if I were a piece of old furniture that might need replacing. I remembered the promise I once made to myself. I will never be a burden. But no one ever asks you when that moment begins. And that was the first night I understood. My family was already deciding what to do with me. In the morning, I woke up before everyone else, as I always did. Habit does not retire, even when people think you should. The house was quiet but not peaceful. Silence has many sounds when you are old enough to recognize them. I moved slowly through the kitchen, making tea for hands that no longer reached for mine. The table still carried marks from when my children were small, scratches from homework, burns from forgotten pans. I remembered scolding them for those marks. Now I traced them with my fingers, wishing they had left more. When they finally came in, their smiles were polite, careful, like smiles given to a stranger who might break. No one mentioned last night. No one ever does. Families don't talk about uncomfortable truths. They hide them under breakfast plates. "You should rest more," one of them said, not looking at me. "You've done enough," another added, as if my life were a finished task. Done. The word echoed in my head. I wanted to ask, done for whom? But instead I nodded. I've learned that nodding keeps the peace, even when it breaks something inside you. As they talked about bills, schedules, plans that didn't include my opinion, I realized they had already started living around me. I was no longer part of the circle. I was the obstacle in the middle they carefully stepped over. I remembered a time when they needed me for everything, when my presence meant safety. Now my presence meant responsibility. And then I noticed it, a folded paper on the counter, quickly pushed aside when I looked too closely. I didn't read it, but I didn't need to. Some papers carry their meaning in the way they are hidden. That was when fear quietly joined me at the table. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like something that planned to stay. I waited until the house emptied itself of voices before I allowed my hands to shake. Fear is strange when you are old. It doesn't rush. It sits beside you, patient, like it knows you won't run anywhere. I washed the same cup 3 times, watching the water spill over my skin, thinking about that folded paper, thinking about how quickly it disappeared. I told myself not to imagine things. Mothers survive by excusing their children. We build entire lives on that skill. They're just tired. They didn't mean it. It's not what it looks like. I repeated those thoughts like prayers. But prayers don't stop the truth from knocking. Later that afternoon, I tried to join them in the living room. They were sitting close, voices low. When I entered, the conversation stopped too fast. Silence snapped into place like a door slammed shut. "Do you need something?" one of them asked. The question sounded kind, but it wasn't. It was a test. And I failed it by saying, "No." I sat there anyway, pretending to watch the television while feeling their discomfort crawl across the room. I realized then how heavy my presence had become. Once I filled spaces. Now I crowded them. I remembered the night my husband died. How the children stood around me, frightened, unsure. I was the one who held them together, who said, "We will manage." And we did. For years. So when did I become the problem to manage? That evening I heard it again, my name spoken softly, followed by the word options. I didn't lean closer this time. Some truths hurt more when you confirm them. Instead, I went to my room and opened the drawer where I kept old letters. Proof that I had once mattered deeply. Proof that love existed here. I held those papers to my chest and whispered something I hadn't said in years. I am still here. And for the first time, I wasn't sure anyone wanted that to be true. That night, sleep refused to come, so I listened to the house breathe. Every home has a rhythm. Pipes ticking, floors settling, distant cars passing by. I had memorized these sounds over decades. They once meant safety. Now they reminded me how awake I was while everyone else dreamed without me. Near midnight, I heard footsteps. Careful ones. Then whispers again. My door was slightly open. Not enough to see, but enough to hear pieces that were never meant for my ears. We can't keep going like this. She needs more care. And who's supposed to handle that? No one said my name, but every word was mine. I closed my eyes and remembered when I carried them to bed, one by one after long days. How their weight felt like purpose in my arms. How tired I was and how little it mattered then. I wondered when tired became a reason to give up on someone. The next morning I noticed changes. Small ones but loud. My pills were laid out neatly, counted without asking me. My doctor's number was written on the fridge in large letters. My calendar had new notes, appointments I had never agreed to. They were organizing my life as if I were already losing it. When I asked about the calendar, one of them smiled too quickly. It's just in case, they said. In case of what, they didn't explain. I went to the window and watched the street. People passed by laughing, living. No one could tell that inside this house, a quiet decision was forming, slow, polite, irreversible. I realized then that love doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it fades into responsibility, and responsibility turns into resentment. I placed my hand on my chest and felt my heart beat, steady, stubborn. I was still thinking clearly, still remembering everything, still capable of deciding, yet no one asked what I wanted. And that frightened me more than any future they were planning without my consent. I began to pay closer attention after that. Not in an obvious way. I had learned long ago that silence is a kind of camouflage. I listened from my room, from the hallway, from behind half-closed doors. When you are young, you speak to be heard. When you are old, you listen to survive. They spoke about time a lot. How little they had. How busy life was. How complicated everything had become. My existence was never mentioned directly, yet somehow it sat in the middle of every sentence. One afternoon I heard a word that made my hands go numb. Facility. It was said softly, carefully, like a curse whispered into a church. I sat down before my legs gave up on me. I had seen places like that. Clean rooms. Polite smiles. People waiting for visits that slowly stopped coming. People who were once parents, once needed, now carefully stored away. I told myself I wouldn't cry. I had cried enough in my life. But tears are stubborn. They come when they choose, not when you allow them. I thought of my wedding ring, still warm on my finger after all these years. I thought of the garden I planted behind the house, each tree marking a season I survived. I thought of the nights I stayed awake worrying about these same children, praying they would be safe, happy, loved. Was this how it ended? With discussions behind my back and plans drawn without my voice? That evening, one of them asked if I remembered what day it was. I did. Perfectly. But I said, sometimes I forget. The relief on their faces was immediate. And in that moment I understood something painful and powerful. My weakness made things easier for them. So I decided then and there. If they were going to plan my future, I would start planning mine too. Quietly. Carefully. While they still believed I wasn't paying attention. From that day on, I let them believe the version of me they were most comfortable with. I moved slower when they watched. I asked the same questions twice. I pretended to forget small things, where I put my glasses, what time dinner was, which day it was on the calendar they controlled. It wasn't difficult. People see what they expect to see. Inside I was counting everything. I counted how often they checked their phones while talking to me. I counted how many decisions were made without my presence. I counted the looks they exchanged when I struggled to stand up, the silent agreements passing between them faster than words. One evening I overheard a sentence that stayed with me like a bruise. She won't last long on her own. Not can't. Won't. As if my life were already moving toward an ending they had accepted. I wondered when they stopped seeing me as someone who survives and started seeing me as someone who fades. That night I took out an old notebook. Its pages were yellow, edges soft from time. I had used it years ago for grocery lists and reminders. Now I began writing again, not lists but thoughts. Memories. Proof. I wrote about the day each of them was born. About sacrifices no one remembered because they were invisible by design. Love is quiet work. That's why it's easy to forget. I also wrote down numbers. Phone numbers. Addresses. Information they assumed I no longer understood. It felt strange, preparing without telling anyone but also empowering. Like standing up inside myself after sitting down for too long. In the morning, one of them praised me for finishing my breakfast. Good job, they said gently. I smiled and thanked them. But inside something hardened. I was no longer just waiting to see what would happen to me. I was watching them, learning how and when they decided who mattered. And I was beginning to understand exactly how dangerous being underestimated can be. The first rail crack appeared on a Sunday afternoon. They were all home, pretending it was a normal day. Laughter sounded forced, like furniture moved to hide a stain on the floor. I sat in my chair, hands folded, watching them circle around a subject no one wanted to name. Then one of them said it. Maybe it would be better for everyone. The room went quiet. No one asked better how or for whom. Those details were already agreed upon. I felt something cold pass through me, not fear this time but clarity. Better for them meant easier, cleaner, quieter. They spoke about safety, about professionals, about how I deserved care. The word deserved sounded like a gift, but it was really a conclusion. A final sentence written without my signature. I nodded at the right moments. I smiled when expected. I even said, I understand. And I did, just not in the way they thought. Understanding doesn't always mean agreeing. Sometimes it means recognizing the moment you stop trusting the people you love. That evening, when everyone was busy, I walked into the garden. My garden. The air smelled like soil and old leaves. I touched the tree I planted after my husband died, my fingers resting on the rough bark. I had survived worse than this. Hunger, loss, loneliness that stretched for years. I had learned how to bend without breaking. Standing there, I made myself a promise. I would not disappear quietly. If they believed I was already halfway gone, I would use that belief to my advantage. I would let them think they were in control, right up until the moment they realized they weren't. Because being old doesn't mean being finished. Sometimes it means you finally see the truth clearly enough to act. After that Sunday, everything moved faster. Papers appeared on the table more often. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Smiles grew tighter, patience thinner. They had crossed an invisible line, from thinking about it to preparing for it. I played my part well. I asked if the stove was already turned off, even when I knew it was. I paused before answering simple questions. I let my hands tremble when someone was watching. Each small performance made them more certain, more confident in their decisions. Certainty can be a dangerous thing. One afternoon while they were out, I found the folder. It was hidden in a drawer that used to hold old photographs. Now it held brochures, contracts, printed emails. Clean buildings. Green lawns. Words like comfort and support printed in friendly colors. I sat at the table for a long time, turning the pages slowly. They had already chosen a place. Already compared prices. Already imagined me living somewhere else. Not once had they asked where I wanted to spend my days. I returned everything exactly as I found it. Panic would only make mistakes. I had learned that patience is a form of strength. That night I added more to my notebook. Not anger, clarity. I wrote down what I wanted and what I would no longer accept. I wrote one sentence twice, pressing the pen hard into the paper. I am not a problem to be solved. Before sleep I looked around my room. The walls held decades of my life. Every corner whispered stories no one else knew. If they thought they could erase me from this house without consequence, they had forgotten one thing. I built this family. And builders know where every weak point is. The day they took me to see the place arrived without ceremony. We're just looking, they said, as if curiosity were harmless. I agreed, pretending confusion, pretending gratitude. Inside, my thoughts were sharp and awake. The building was bright. Too bright. Everything smelled like cleaning products and careful distance. People smiled at me the way you smile at someone you don't expect to know your name for long. A woman spoke slowly, explaining routines, meals, activities. She called me dear 3 times in one sentence. I nodded, counting the exits. Other residents sat quietly, staring at televisions or windows. Some looked lost. Others looked like they had already given up asking questions. I wondered how many of them had families who once promised never. When we left, one of my children squeezed my hand. "It's nice, isn't it?" I said. "It's quiet." They took that as approval. On the drive home, they discussed timelines. Weeks. Maybe a month. They spoke as if I were luggage waiting to be moved. That evening, I pretended to be tired and went to my room early. Instead of sleeping, I pulled out my notebook and wrote until my hand ached. I wrote instructions, decisions, boundaries. I also wrote letters. Not accusations. Not blame. Truths. If they were going to remove me from my life, they would at least have to read my words first. I folded the letters carefully and placed them in an envelope. I didn't address it yet. Timing matters more than honesty. Lying in bed, I felt strangely calm. They believed everything was settled. They had no idea that the quiet woman in the next room was already preparing the moment that would change everything they thought they knew about me. I began to notice how easily people relax when they think the outcome is decided. My children stopped arguing among themselves. Plans were spoken openly now. Dates circled on the calendar without hesitation. They believed resistance was over. I helped that belief grow. I asked what clothes I should pack. I wondered aloud if I would need my slippers. I thanked them for taking care of things. Each word was a soft confirmation that they were in control. Control makes people careless. One afternoon, I asked to visit the bank. I said I wanted to make sure everything was simple, in case I forget things later. The concern in my voice sounded real enough to convince them. They agreed immediately. At the bank, I sat calmly while papers were brought out. Accounts were reviewed. Signatures were requested. No one questioned my clarity. Old age, it seems, is only invisible at home. I made changes quietly. Necessary ones. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. A few days later, one of them asked if I was scared. I answered honestly but not fully. "I'm at peace," I said. They smiled, relieved. Peace, after all, is what people expect from someone who is about to give up their place. They didn't ask why I was peaceful. They didn't wonder what kind of peace comes from preparation instead of surrender. As I lay in bed, I placed my hand over the envelope of letters hidden beneath my mattress. The weight of it was comforting. Soon they would open those pages expecting gratitude. What they would find instead was something far more unsettling. A voice they had already dismissed, speaking clearly and without apology. And there would be no pretending not to hear it this time. The house felt different as the day grew closer. Not louder. Quieter. Like a place preparing to let something go. My children moved around me with a strange mix of kindness and relief. The decision had been made. Now they were simply waiting for it to happen. I watched them the way you watch people at a train station, busy, distracted, already imagining life after departure. One evening, they gathered in the living room and asked me to sit with them. "We just want to talk," they said. That sentence always means the opposite. They spoke carefully, using gentle voices and practice phrases. They told me this was for my own good, that I would be safer, that I wouldn't have to worry anymore. I looked at their faces and wondered when worrying for me became such a burden. "I don't want to be difficult," I said softly. Their shoulders relaxed. They mistook obedience for acceptance. So I added, "But I want one thing." They leaned in, ready to grant a final wish. "I want one last family dinner," I said. "All of us. Here." They agreed instantly. Gratitude is easier than guilt. After they left the room, I went back to my bedroom and took out the letters again. I read them slowly, making sure every word said exactly what I meant. No anger. No pleading. Just truth placed where it could no longer be ignored. I also prepared something else, something they would not expect from someone they believed was fading. That night I slept deeply, dreaming of long tables, honest faces, and a silence that would finally be broken the right way. The dinner would not be a goodbye. It would be a reckoning. The day of the dinner arrived wrapped in false normality. The table was set with care, as if effort could replace sincerity. Dishes I taught them to love filled the air with familiar smells. For a moment I almost believed we were a family again, not a meeting held under the cover of food. They laughed too loudly, avoided certain topics, watched me closely as if expecting me to forget why we were there. I served them myself, ignoring the protests. I wanted them to remember this image, my hands steady, capable. Not the version they had already packed away in their minds. Halfway through the meal, I placed my napkin down. I have something to say, I told them. Forks paused midair. Eyes lifted. The room held its breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply spoke. I talked about nights without sleep. About choices made quietly without applause. About love that doesn't ask for returns, only respect. I reminded them of promises they had forgotten because keeping them became inconvenient. No one interrupted me. Then I placed the envelopes on the table. These are for you, I said. Not to make you feel guilty. To make you remember. Their faces changed as they realized this was not a farewell speech. This was not confusion. This was clarity. I know about the place, I added calmly. I know about the dates. And I know you never asked me. Silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. I am old, I continued. But I am not gone. For the first time in a long while, they had nothing ready to say. And that was exactly the point. They read the letter slowly. No one rushed. No one spoke. The room filled with the soft sound of paper unfolding, and the weight of words landing where they could no longer be avoided. I watched their faces change. Confusion first, then discomfort, then something closer to shame. Not because I demanded it, but because memory has a way of undoing carefully built excuses. One of them finally looked up. We didn't think you knew, they said. I knew, I answered. I just didn't speak. There is power in choosing when to be silent, and even more in choosing when to stop. I told them about the bank, about the notebook, about the fact that I had already made my decisions, not out of spite but self-respect. This is my life, I said, and I will not live it as a problem you pass between yourselves. They tried to explain, to justify, to soften the truth with good intentions. I listened because listening had always been my role. But then I stood up. My legs shook but my voice did not. If I leave this house, I said, it will be because I choose to. Not because you planned it quietly and hoped I wouldn't notice. One of them reached for my hand. I let them. Love does not disappear just because it fails. But trust breaks differently. I gathered the plates myself, ending the dinner without ceremony. Some conversations don't need conclusions, just honesty. As I walked back to my room, I felt lighter. Not because things were fixed, but because the truth was no longer trapped inside me. Whatever happened next would happen with my eyes open. That night, no one slept much. I could hear doors opening, footsteps pacing, whispers breaking the quiet they had once controlled so carefully. The house had absorbed the truth, and now it didn't know where to put it. In the morning, they were different. Softer. Unsure. They asked me what I wanted to do, not as a formality, but as a question they were afraid of hearing the answer to. I want time, I said. Time to breathe without decisions hanging over my head. Time to exist without being measured by usefulness. They agreed quickly. Too quickly. Guilt has a way of making people generous. Over the next days, I noticed real effort. They included me in conversations. Asked my opinion. Listened, truly listened, even when my answers were inconvenient. But effort born from fear is fragile. I didn't trust the change yet. I had learned that apologies fade faster than habits. So I continued preparing. I visited an old friend they had forgotten I still spoke to. I arranged things I didn't explain. Independence doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet organization. One evening, one of my children sat beside me and asked, "Are you angry?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I'm awake." They didn't know how to respond to that. As I went to bed, I felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not victory, but steadiness. Whatever path I chose next, it would be mine. And that knowledge changed the weight of everything. The calm that followed was unsettling. Everyone behaved as if we had stepped onto thin ice, afraid that one wrong word would crack it again. They were careful with me now, too careful, as if awareness alone could undo weeks of quiet planning. I let them try. I accepted the tea they made. I answered their questions. I even laughed when it felt natural. But inside, I was measuring something else: consistency. Love is not proven by one good week. It reveals itself over time. One afternoon, I heard them arguing again. Not about me directly, that was the difference. This time it was about schedules, about who had time, about whose life was already too full. My name floated between sentences like an unspoken responsibility. Nothing had truly changed. That realization didn't hurt the way it once would have. It clarified. That evening I opened my notebook and wrote one final list. Not memories. Not instructions. Decisions. Where I would live. What I would take. What I would leave behind without regret. I realized something important as I wrote. Staying is also a choice. And sometimes, leaving is not abandonment. It is self-preservation. At dinner, I announced calmly that I would be spending a few days away. With someone I trusted. I didn't ask permission. I informed them. The silence that followed was familiar, but this time it didn't belong to me. "You're leaving?" one of them asked. "For now," I said. "Because I want to." I went to my room and began packing slowly, carefully, touching each object like a goodbye that didn't need tears. They watched from the doorway, uncertain, realizing too late that control is something you only notice when it's gone. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to freedom, not loud, not dramatic, but solid enough to stand on. I left early in the morning, before explanations could weaken my resolve. The air outside felt different, colder, sharper, honest. I carried only one small bag, filled with the things that mattered, not the things that filled shelves. No one tried to stop me. Sometimes silence is permission disguised as concern. The place I went to was modest, quiet, a home, not a solution. The woman who opened the door hugged me without asking questions. That alone told me I had chosen well. The first night there, I slept without listening for whispers, without waiting to hear my name spoken behind closed doors. I slept like someone who had finally stepped out of the way of other people's plans. Days passed gently. I cooked when I wanted, walked when I could, spoke when it felt right. No one measured my worth by convenience. My children called. Their voices were unsure, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound like regret. "I'm safe," I told them. "And I'm thinking." That was the truth. I thought about how love changes when fear enters it. How quickly care turns into control. How easy it is to forget that aging does not erase personhood. One afternoon I received a message. They wanted to talk. Properly. Without assumptions. Without decisions made in advance. I didn't answer right away. For the first time, time belonged to me. And whatever choice I made next would come from strength, not from being cornered, not from being handled carefully like something fragile. I wasn't fragile. I was simply done being invisible. I returned home on my own terms. Not because I was asked and not because I was afraid to stay away. I returned because I wanted to see whether the space I left behind had learned anything in my absence. They were waiting, nervous in a way I hadn't seen before. No speeches were prepared. No explanations rushed forward. They listened first. I told them my decision calmly. I would stay for now. Not as a burden. Not as a responsibility passed quietly between them, but as a person with boundaries, choices, and a voice that would no longer wait for permission. "There will be no more secret plans," I said. "No conversations about my life without me." They agreed. Not eagerly. Honestly, I knew this wasn't a perfect ending. Families rarely offer those. But it was a real one. That night I sat alone in my room and looked around at the walls that had held my life for so long. They felt different now, not like a cage but like a place I could leave again if I ever needed to. I understood something then that took me a lifetime to learn. Love does not excuse erasure. Care does not replace respect. And age does not cancel dignity. I lay down and closed my eyes, not afraid of tomorrow. Because whatever came next, I would meet it awake, with my name spoken out loud, and my life still firmly in my own hands.